So now that we're recording, I'll just again welcome everyone to this morning's webinar covering the 2023 PURA annual report. In addition to all the materials and dockets that we'll present today, 2023 was a busy year for the commissioners as well. We do want to continue to applaud Commissioner Michael Caron's service, which he completed in November as the president of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, also known as NARUC. He presided over an engaging year with a lot of travel that we were able to resume following COVID. So I want to congratulate him on his service in 2023. Also a position that the vice chairman held a few years back. Last year, a busy year for the vice chairman as well. He served another term as the chair of the State Water Planning Council. In 2023, I was elected vice president of the New England Conference of Public Utilities, served as the acting president of the National Council on Electricity Policy, and continued my service on the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So at the commissioner's level, in addition to all of the docket work and continued activities at our staff level in the dockets, another busy year for the commissioners. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to PURA's Managing Director of Technical Staff, Josh Ryer, who is going to get us started on this morning's webinar. I want to thank everyone in advance for attending today's presentation. Again, incredibly proud of all the work that we completed in 2023. Obviously, a great testament to the excellent staff that we have here at the agency. Josh?
Great, thank you so much, Chairman, and thank you everyone for attending today. We wanted to start this webinar by level setting a little bit about what PURA actually does, what we don't do, and how we're set up. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So as many of the folks on the webinar today will know, PURA regulates the investor-owned electric, gas, and water utilities in the state of Connecticut. So for electric, that includes United Illuminating and Eversource. For gas, that's Yankee and Connecticut Natural Gas, and the Southern Gas Company, as well as a number of water companies that include Connecticut Water and Aquarian. We also, as part of that, look into the rates of those companies as well as their investments. We look into grid modernization efforts on the electric side. We also have oversight over the retail electric suppliers in gas pipeline safety. And of course, if there's any electric, gas, or water mergers or acquisitions, we oversee those. We also have, and as you'll hear about more later today, a really important role in consumer outreach and education that we take seriously. And we also have some limited oversight over telecommunications. Next slide. There are several things that we do not regulate. I'm not going to get into all the different things on this slide, but it is a really important resource to understand the things that are not regulated by PURA, particularly since some of those things might have previously been regulated by PURA. Next slide, please. As the chairman already mentioned, her colleagues, the vice chairman, Jack Bukowski, and Commissioner Michael Caron, the commissioners are also supported by a chief of staff, Teresa Govert, as well as two administrative assistants that help run really the agency. And then PURA is broken down into 5 offices. The first office that I'll talk about is the Office of Technical and Regulatory Analysis, which is under my purview. That includes 6 different units. You'll hear from the first 5 listed here today in a little bit, and I'll get to the run of show after a couple of slides. We also have the Office of Administration and Legal Operations, which is headed up by our General Counsel, Scott Muska. That includes both document control, which some people call docket control, as well as the Adjudications Unit, which is led by the Director of Adjudications, J. Don Francisco. We have an Office of Federal, Regional, and Wholesale Affairs, and we also have an Office of Educational Outreach and Enforcement, or Education Outreach and Enforcement to be more precise. You'll hear from that team a little bit later, and we'll talk about their 3 units. It's really important to note that often PURA will talk about what is called decisional staff, or the staff that work with the commissioners on adjudicated proceedings, all of our formal investigations. That's really made up of the Office of Technical and Regulatory Analysis, or we call it TRA, which is my office, and the adjudications unit, which is led by Scott Muska and Jay Don Francisco, as I mentioned earlier. The Office of Education, Outreach, and Enforcement was actually set up previously, actually somewhat recently, as we'll talk about in a little bit, and actually has a wall up between us and us being decisional staff and themselves on docketed matters, so that they can engage more directly with consumers and stakeholders on issues before the authority. And then last, but certainly not least, we have the Office of Legislative and Government Affairs, whom we'll hear from at the end of today's webinar, and they'll give an update on all of the legislative action that happened last year and PURA's work there. Next slide, please. So great, so getting into the topic of today's webinar, the PURA 2023 annual report is organized in two different ways. It's first organized by major topics, so rate cases, PBR, or performance-based regulation, and then our equitable modern grid modernization initiatives, or just for short here, grid modernization, and then subsequently is broken down by the different sectors that we regulate, and all the topics and information that weren't covered by the major three topics that I just mentioned. It includes summaries of major decisions and other major works that were accomplished in 2023, as well as some nuggets of information about work that continues to move forward in 2024, some of which you'll hear about today. Really importantly, the PURA annual report, as well as hopefully everyone on this webinar is familiar with our quarterly newsletters, are really designed to facilitate broader understanding and engagement with PURA's work. You've probably heard the chairman say this before, but it certainly bears repeating, that PURA's work is really dependent on the stakeholders that engage with us and provide us the record evidence for us to be able to make solid decisions. So really, stakeholder engagement in our formal proceedings is of the utmost importance to us. Next slide. Great, so just to give you, there's a great one-pager that was created for this annual report that has some key metrics for last year. And as you can see, there was roughly 100 decisions that were issued and led by what are called decisional staff that I mentioned earlier, the Office of Technical and Regulatory Analysis and the adjudications unit. That equates to roughly 2.5 decisions per, it equates to roughly 2 decisions per week, or 1 decision every 2.5 business days. It also is approximately 2.5 decisions per decisional staff member, which also correlates to about 50 pages. As you'll see kind of in the middle of the infographic on the right, there was over 1,000 motion rulings last year. So over 4 a day. And then not to forget about our friends in the Office of Education, Outreach, and Enforcement, you'll see that there's an additional 362 licensing, certification, and submetering applications that they handled, which roughly equates to over 10 of those decisions per EOE staff. And then finally on the right, you'll see that roughly $16 million in fines were issued last year. And then actually last, you'll see at the top a list of all of the public engagement efforts that PURA underwent in 2023, which included roughly 1 technical meeting per week, as well as roughly 1 hearing per week. Next slide. Great. So the remaining webinar is really broken down by office. You'll first hear from the leadership team, the rest of the leadership team of the Office of Technical and Regulatory Analysis, which will talk about performance-based regulation, and then the progress that was made in 2023 on all 4 of the equitable modern grid objectives. I know obviously you only see 3 here, two of which live under the decarbonization objectives. We also hear about gas pipeline safety and rate cases. We'll then transition to the Office of Education Outreach and Enforcement, which, as promised, will give you an overview of what their office does and review the 2023 work that they accomplished. And then we'll finish with the Office of Legislative and Government Affairs. Before we move on to the next slide, and I pass it over to Peter Kramer, who will go over our performance-based regulation work. I just would be remiss to not, we won't hear from one of the key members of the Office of Technical and Regulatory Analysis today, who leads, Julia Dumaine, who leads our strategy and operations unit. It's her unit that is really responsible for the creation of this report, as well as the quarterly newsletters that I mentioned earlier. And she also leads our innovative energy solutions program. So wanted to make sure that Julia got a shout out. Also, she leads and works with our fantastic case coordinators who help for all of those that engage with our dockets. You know that they're vital to making sure that the agency runs efficiently. So I want to make sure to shout out them as well. And certainly last but not least, all of the work that the Office of Technical and Regulatory Analysis will be going over today, as well as some of the work that EOE will talk about, was informed by and helped and supported by the legal advisors that are a part of the adjudications unit. So certainly, although you're not hearing directly from them today, their impact was vitally important to delivering on what we'll talk about today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Peter to start talking about performance-based regulation.
Thank you, Josh. As Josh mentioned, I'm Peter Kramer. I'm the supervisor with the Utility Performance and Analysis Unit, and I'll be starting with performance-based regulation, or PBR, as we often refer to it. So the authority's investigation into performance-based regulation for the electric distribution companies was given statutory authority in Public Act 20-5, also known as the Take Back Our Grid Act. And the authority conducted the first phase of the PBR investigation in docket 210515. And that was initiated in May 2021, as you see here. I'm going to get into a little bit more of its intent and the meaning in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So with the authority's PBR proceedings, we're aiming to do three things. First, establish a comprehensive and dynamic regulatory framework. And this means reviewing the full existing regulatory framework and unifying it under a set of regulatory goals, priority outcomes, and considerations that meet the public interest and can adapt as may be necessary in the future. Second, we're aiming to improve EDC performance in particular areas. And this means creating performance metrics tied to the priority outcomes that can offer transparency and accountability for the authority, for docket participants, and the public when reviewing EDC performance. And third and finally, we're aiming to better align EDC incentives through the regulatory framework with the public interest. This means establishing financial incentives, and in some cases penalties, related to performance against the metrics I just mentioned, and transparent metrics and scorecards that can help serve these outcomes and make that performance clear to stakeholders and the general public. Next slide, please. But before I go much further, I'd like to take a moment just to describe PBR, and by contrasting it somewhat with traditional cost of service rate making, which has been the sort of the bedrock for regulatory work in the electric distribution sector for about 100 years. So with traditional cost of service, this cost recovery for the utilities is based largely on the amount of capital investment made. So they are able to recover costs and earn a return on the capital invested. On the performance-based regulation side, it's a modified version of cost recovery in which there is recovery of costs for those incurred, but also metrics and incentive structures that measure utility performance and add another dimension of accountability and incentive for that cost recovery. On the revenue requirement side, the revenue requirement reflects what's collected from customers' rates for the utility to earn a reasonable return. And on the PBR side, it looks a little beyond revenue to say It's not just about cost recovery for that revenue requirement, but also how is the EDC achieving policy goals and achieving particular financial metrics to meet those incentives or disincentives for PBR. And then finally, traditional cost of service rate making has more of a focus on capital expenditures and operating expenses. And we contrast that with PBR with more of a focus on outcomes, not just what amount was spent and then recovered, but instead what outcomes were achieved and how do you see that progress against the metrics that add up to those outcomes. So with that in mind for performance-based regulation, I'll talk a little bit more about the proceeding in the next couple of slides. So first, the PBR proceeding was divided into two phases, and the first phase was completed last year, culminating in a decision adopted in April 2023. The decision adopted the 4 regulatory goals and 9 priority outcomes that you see listed on the right side of the screen. I'm not going to belabor them, but just for edification, the first goal, excellent operational performance, which includes 4 priority outcomes within it: business operations and investment efficiency, comprehensive and transparent system planning, distribution system utilization, and reliable and resilient electric service. The second goal, public policy achievement, which currently is focused on social equity and greenhouse gas emissions reduction. The third goal, customer empowerment and satisfaction. So both empowering customers to use their data and make decisions about their energy consumption, and also quality service from the EDCs. And fourth and finally, but certainly not least, reasonable, equitable, and affordable rates through the priority outcome of affordable service. Now, these goals and outcomes tie together both traditional regulatory goals, such as reliability, safety, and affordability, and the equitable and modern grid initiative objectives, which Josh alluded to a moment ago. So bringing those together kind of creates this broad umbrella to cover the aims of the whole regulatory framework for Connecticut. And the goals and outcomes that you see here are supported by the various proceedings, programs, and regulatory mechanisms that you'll hear about throughout the presentation. Essentially, all authority actions and decisions must be in service of these regulatory goals and priority outcomes. Next slide. Now, phase 2 of the PBR proceeding, where the authority is investigating the actions and reforms necessary to ensure that the goals and outcomes are well supported. Phase 2 is ongoing, and it's organized into 3 reopener dockets, as you see here on the slide. First, the REO1 reopener, REO1 stands for reopener number 1, is looking at revenue adjustment mechanisms. So the mechanisms that have to do with the EDCs or the utilities revenue requirement and how they recover costs. This includes looking at the multi-year rate plan, earnings sharing mechanism, revenue decoupling mechanism, and potential strategies for equalizing capital and operating solutions. This reopener docket is expected to culminate in guidance for future EDC rate cases. The second reopener is focused on performance mechanisms, which refers to the performance metrics, scorecards, and performance incentive mechanisms, those incentives and penalties, and is looking at the ways that those various priority outcomes are represented through tracking for transparency, for interpreting the data, and for providing accountability. And maybe a way to think about it, I'm not sure if it's a perfect analogy, but it's like a report card in some ways of looking at how the utilities are doing against those outcomes. And third is the REO3, the third reopener, focused on integrated distribution system planning. And this is aimed at bringing together the pieces that exist for the company's existing distribution system planning, adding some transparency, and evaluating potential reforms if may be necessary. And that's aimed to really establish that transparent process and any reporting standards that also might be necessary. So these proceedings, as I mentioned, are ongoing with expected completion in January 2025 and a little bit later in the year for the third reopener proceeding. Next slide, I'll mention just the connection that I alluded to between how the regulatory goals were established through the Phase 1 decision and the connection to the Equitable Modern Grid Initiative, or EMG as we sometimes refer to it. So PBR is really an extension of the Equitable Modern Grid Initiative, in that if you think about how that initiative, grid modernization, as we sometimes refer to it as well, was aimed at modernizing grid operations and programs, PBR is similarly aimed at modernizing that attendant regulatory framework. So that extension, I think, is important to acknowledge, because PBR is really building on the incredible work that's been done through the grid modernization efforts. And those grid modernization efforts were based on the 4 objectives that you see listed on the screen. Quickly there to grow the green economy, enable a decarbonized future, improve access to reliable, resilient, and secure electric service, and advance energy affordability, especially in underserved communities. Now, I highlight this to both make the connection to PBR and because the remainder of the presentation is primarily organized around these EMG objectives. And so we do this so that we can share some of the exciting progress that's been made on these grid modernization fronts in 2023. Next slide. So first up is the EMG objective around affordability. And I'll start by highlighting a report that PURA published for the state legislature in compliance with Section 16 of Public Act 23-102. Next slide. Thank you. So this report investigated energy supply costs for standard service, which is the default electricity supply service for customers who do not select a third-party electricity supplier for their service. The prices for energy supply are set at in the ISO New England wholesale markets. And though PURA does not oversee ISO New England in those markets, it does oversee the utilities procurement of standard service, so the process by which we go to market and procure electricity for standard service. And on the next slide, we identify the specific topics that were identified for investigation through Public Act 23-102. So they are to look at the existing procurement policies for standard service, look at the practices of peer jurisdictions, including both municipal electric utilities in the state and other deregulated states, sort of peer jurisdictions that to evaluate those processes as well. Put the pieces together then and make potential recommendations around modifications to the existing procurement process that might help advance the objectives of the procurement process, which I'll speak to in just a moment. The fourth point on that was identified by Public Act 23-102 was also to look at grid scale procurements, distributed generation, and renewable portfolio standards. And this investigation is to come in a future decision in the same docket, which is 17-1203 RE10. On the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about the contents of the report. It is available on the docket number I just mentioned and was also provided to the Energy and Technology Committee of the state legislature. So the report evaluates 10 potential modifications to the standard service procurement process aimed at advancing, in some cases, the procurement objectives. So those objectives set forth in prior statute are to ensure just and reasonable rates for standard service customers. And sometimes we use that as a way to think about affordability. Is it just and reasonable? Is it affordable for customers? It's also set forth that we need to be looking for ways to ensure that those rates are stable. There's not too much volatility over time, and that rates are reflective of the market, the prevailing market prices over time. So the report looked at those objectives and evaluated peer jurisdictions and came to evaluate these 10 potential modifications and made recommendations for the ENT committee to consider. So that is my piece of the affordability EMG objective, and I thank you for your attention and interest. And with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Stephanie Cohane, to talk more about activities under this EMG objective.
Great, thanks, Peter. Just checking you can hear me. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So again, my name is Stephanie Cohane. I am the supervisor of the Clean and Affordable Energy Unit, internally referred to as CAE. And I'm happy to be here this morning to talk about some of the dockets that our small but mighty team has been working on in the past year. So as Peter mentioned, sticking with the affordability theme under the EMG kind of objective, as Peter noted, my unit leads the annual energy affordability proceeding, which you can see kind of summarized here on the slide. So this proceeding covers the electric and gas distribution companies. As part of this annual docket, it's been covered numerous topics in recent years, part of which is a statutorily required review of the company's what is called arrearage forgiveness program plans. Those are submitted to PURA in June of each year. Essentially, what's in that plan is kind of reflected on the slide here. The matching payment program, that is a utility match program for income eligible customers who are behind on their bills, as well as Eversource's New Start and UI Bill Forgiveness, or BSP, another arrearage forgiveness program with set parameters. But kind of underlying those two programs is also something that PURA has spent a lot of time looking at in recent years, is really the eligibility and process improvements for customers to first be aware of these resources should they need them, and also providing avenues for receiving what's called financial hardship designation, which also, among other things, protects income eligible customers from electricity shutoff from November 1 of May 1st each year, as well as customers who have either a life-threatening or serious illness and therefore would qualify for medical protection under the law. And so basically there's a series of different resources and protections, payment programs available for customers affected, and the Energy Affordability Annual Review, among other things, kind of looks at those resources and programs in totality. Something else that the annual Energy Affordability Review has looked at recently is our separate implementation of a low-income discount rate, which I'll cover more in one of the next slides. Another topic that's just listed here is that a few years ago, through one of these annual reviews, the authority established comprehensive reporting requirements on various statistics and metrics around all of these programs listed on the slide, and the utilities are also directed to develop a public-facing online dashboard to provide data visualizations and try to allow stakeholders to unpack some of these energy affordability metrics further. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, in the fall of 2022, PURA issued a decision that established a low-income discount rate. This is for income-eligible residential customers. So just very briefly, there are two tiers of discount that would be available depending on the customer's current financial situation, and this would be a discount off the total electricity bill. We provided links in this presentation for folks who are interested in learning more to the utilities website. But wanted to just kind of cover in this annual report, looking at the 2023 review dockets, there were some of the issues or matters of implementation that we worked through in this 2023 annual energy affordability proceeding with the utilities and other stakeholders. In addition, in this docket, we looked at various changes to the matching payment program that are required due to legislation that Peter mentioned previously, Public Act 23-102. In addition, we're kind of re-examining how we are thinking holistically about customer participation and what success looks like in the matching payment program. You can see other modifications. AFP stands for Arrearage Forgiveness Program, that these annual review covered. There's a rolling hardship process. This is for financial hardship customers, again, thinking about the idea of how folks are accessing and benefiting from these programs, and kind of greasing the wheels where we can in terms of making it straightforward for customers. Next slide, please. Separate, under the umbrella of the affordability kind of EMG topic, and this also resulted from Public Act 23-102. It directed PURA to establish a process for compensating eligible stakeholder groups to participate in PURA proceedings. And you heard Josh say before, this is a key goal of the commissioners is to have diverse stakeholder perspectives represented. We are asked to make decisions and recommendations based on the evidence before us. And so this new program is aimed to expand the scope of stakeholders able to participate in a meaningful way. And so you can kind of see some of the program parameters established through legislation, through the statute in this program. So this was stood up last fall and rolled out. The decision rolled out in January of this year. So stakeholders in newly opened proceedings can apply, and there's a process and information on our website, which you can see here, kind of helping you walk through the steps that need to be taken. You'll see in a notice of proceeding for each docket the kind of information and timing about how to participate should this be of interest to folks. Next slide, please. So shifting gears from the affordability topic, two of the other equitable modern grid objectives, as you've heard a couple times now, are to support the cost-effective transition to decarbonization and to also support the green economy. So in my intro, the Clean and Affordable Energy Unit, the benefit, we get to work on a variety of different topics. And so the next few slides will cover CAE's work that fall under this decarbonization topic. Next slide. So as I mentioned, CAE covers multiple priority dockets here, which you can see here on the slide.
Until Stephanie is able to rejoin us, I'll go ahead and go through these slides. So as Stephanie was mentioning, we have a number of annual dockets that look at our clean energy programs, and really the intention of these annual program reviews rather is to critically examine key metrics related to these programs, and then to think about whether or not there are necessary changes to the programs to help them better achieve the objectives that are set out for each of these programs when they're established, and through a stakeholder vetting process to establish those objectives. So you can see here there's different there's links to the different decisions. I won't go too much into the details of these programs and the updates for this last year. But I do want to highlight the fact that our Energy Storage Solutions program just made changes to our the incentives that are available for residential customers, particularly with an interest in making sure that we're deploying more battery storage systems, particularly paired with rooftop solar in underserved communities. There's a press release that was actually issued by the authority in early January on that, so we direct you to that. And then we also wanted to flag on this slide the fact that these dockets will get started in late May or early June this year. And as I mentioned at the top, it's really important to our processes to get robust stakeholder engagement. And so we'd encourage folks that are interested in any one of these programs to look out for the notices that will be issued in late May, early June, that will start those proceedings, and to provide us with any input that you might have on these programs. Just for reference, you'll see here the different docket numbers for last year, but the docket numbers for this year will be the same numbers, but just instead of 23, it'll be 24. With that, I understand that we have Stephanie back, so maybe we go to the next slide and let her come back.
Can you hear me now? The Zoom gods are against me today. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry about that. Thanks for stepping in, Josh. All right, so the next topic to cover briefly here is the Clean and Renewable Energy Report that we released, which is a second annual, just came out earlier this month in conjunction with the PURA annual report, which we're covering today. So PURA, the programs that Josh, I'm sure, just walked through are all reflected with more information in terms of metrics and data deployment or project deployment levels in this, what we're referring to, Clean and Renewable, or CRE report. So it's really this kind of centralized document for tracking performance metrics, as I mentioned, for those programs. We also include data trying to get more of a holistic statewide perspective on deployments achieved through other public policy contracts and power purchase agreements that have been selected through the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection's procurement processes. Connecticut also has a Renewable Portfolio Standards, or RPS, program and rules set in place, and so this report captures some of that information as well. Next slide, please. So just to highlight a few, the next few slides, we'll just highlight a few of the programs and information that is available in this CRE report, but I really do encourage folks who are interested to kind of dig in and look into the graphs and numbers and program summaries that are available there. I think there's a lot of really great information kind of captured all in one place, because as Josh mentioned, we have these annual program review proceedings that dive really deep into one particular topic. But if you wanted to get the bird's eye view, as well as the CRE report and this, obviously the annual report, are great resources for that. So just wanted to highlight, as I mentioned, the electric vehicle charging program established or launched in 2022, goes through 2030. You can see in the chart, or the table here, that are various deployment targets. What this really means is that PURA has established a program for level 2 and direct current fast chargers, or DCFCs, charging infrastructure, kind of to build out and incentives for that across different program segments. So you can see the residential single family, but also for folks living in multi-unit dwellings to have charging infrastructure there as well. And then more kind of public facing, the level 2 and DCFC available, as well as looking at for a workplace or light duty fleet uses. I should mention that this EV charging program is established looking primarily at the light duty fleet context. We are also working on a docket looking at program design for supporting the medium and heavy duty build out of EVs in the state as well. So as you can see on the slide, in addition to the incentives, the kind of suite of offerings includes managed charging offerings for residential participants who are receiving an incentive can either participate at a different levels based on their interest. And there's also some rate design options for separately metered direct current fast chargers and fleet. Next slide, please. Again, just to highlight some of the takeaways of the CRE report, this one is on the Residential Renewable Energy Solutions, or RRES program. Traditionally, there has been this kind of benchmark of establishing 50 to 60 megawatts of residential solar deployment per year. You can see on the slide here that in 2023, we saw the highest annual residential solar deployment to date. That's kind of in totality. Next slide, please. And then from like the broader perspective, which is inclusive of the RRES program, but also looks at the non-residential solar deployments through NRES, as well as the legacy programs. You might have heard of the low and zero emission renewable energy credit programs, LREC, ZREC, also the predecessor of the RRES program through net metering and the residential solar investment program, RSIP. All of that data is reflected here in the annual solar deployments to date. So you can see that there's really been an uptick in recent years. I think with that, I think that's my last slide. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Steve. And Josh, thanks again for stepping in there.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good morning, everybody. My name is Stephen Capozzi. I supervise the Reliability and Security and Resilience Unit here at PURA. And our team takes on various responsibilities across the utility sectors. which include oversight of generally of utility engineering operations and planning, and particularly when it comes to grid modernization and reliability and resilience initiatives. We're also involved in our agency's efforts for decarbonization. And so building on Stephanie's discussion of the RRES program, I'll talk first about two related efforts. One that concluded a couple months ago and another that is still ongoing. Both of these investigations target an improvement to how distributed energy resources interconnect, or DERs interconnect to the electric distribution system. Specifically, we wanted to address circumstances where a customer looking to interconnect to DER, say a rooftop solar PV system, is facing upgrade costs in order to do so. So we tackled these issues in two dockets. One docket, the first one I'll talk about, addresses residential sized DERs, which in Connecticut are systems that are sized at 25 kV or smaller, and are most often rooftop solar systems. The other docket addresses non-residential systems, so anything above, essentially anything above 25 kV. The investigation looking into the residential DER cost interconnection is complete. The other one, the second one, looking into non-residential interconnections is still underway. So again, we'll first turn to the investigation into the residential DER interconnection cost allocation. So this was done in docket 220629, which is up on the screen. For all the details of this investigation and our findings, you can see on the top right, there's a link to our decision. So please click there to get more detail. So the first thing I wanted to discuss, which you can see on this first slide, is what our interconnection policy looked like before it was revised in that decision. What happens if a customer with a residential size system is looking to interconnect that system onto the electric distribution system? They first apply to the Eversource or UI, who would review the technical details of the proposed system, model the operation of that system onto their distribution system, and evaluate whether it can operate safely and reliably while it's interconnected. Those technical requirements, or sometimes called technical screens, again, they're put in place to ensure that the electric distribution system can operate reliably and safely following their interconnection of that system. So if the project passes those technical screens, it essentially gets approval to be built and interconnected. If the project does not pass the technical screens, then one of two things can happen generally. Eversource would present an option to modify the system, which is generally done in the form of reducing the system size or the system's generation capacity. Another option is that the customer who's looking to interconnect may pay for upgrade to the distribution system, usually most often in the form of upgraded distribution service transformers. But sometimes other upgrades are needed, and it really depends on the technical screens. So now these, I want to point out, while these types of scenarios are relatively infrequent, as noted on this slide, we have to keep a couple things in mind. First, the cost of these upgrades can be in the thousands of dollars for customers. And so while they are relatively infrequent at this point, that cost to the customers who do face it can often result in a few things: customer reducing system size, or customers withdrawing their application altogether. Second, while the numbers are relatively small at this point, they have been increasing, and we expect that they will continue to increase as more and more systems are interconnected into the system. So for those reasons, we undertook this investigation to find ways to remove those barriers for residential DER adoption. We also saw an opportunity to address the fairness in the interconnection process. And what do I mean by that? So under that current policy, under that old policy, when a customer looking to install onto the electric distribution system, when they're responsible for all those costs, it may not be fair for them to bear those costs solely when other customers that came before them may have interconnected without having to incur those costs. And anybody who comes in after the fact may be able to take advantage of that upgrade that was paid for by the prior customer. So next slide, Laura. Next slide, please. So how did we revise the process? So we brought all the interested stakeholders together, weighed the evidence, considered the positions, and we adopted an improved approach that is relatively straightforward to apply and more equitable in a number of ways. So essentially, as indicated in this slide, you can see what's crossed out over there on the right. Interconnecting customers are no longer required to pay for upgrades on a case-by-case basis when they trigger the need for an upgrade. Instead, what we do is we'll add a small fee to the interconnection application. This fee will be set at a rate that will ideally cover the costs of all interconnection upgrades that are forecast to occur during that time. So we developed this process by looking at historical costs, considered as many factors were available in the record to establish this policy that would essentially, instead of putting all the costs on the customer interconnecting, it assigns costs at an equitable rate to all customers who are looking to interconnect over a certain time period. You'll see here, though, that we do exempt certain customers from this additional application fee. Specifically, applicants whose customers are no more than 60% of the state median income, or applicants who have projects proposed in a distressed municipality. Those customers, on this slide, we refer to these customers as EJ applicants. Those customers would be exempt from this additional fee on the application. We exempted these applicants from this additional fee because requiring an additional fee for EJ applicants is counter to the policy objective of supporting residential DER for EJ communities, for folks in these communities, where those deployment levels in those communities already lag the stated policy goals. And second, we wanted to ensure that these applicants are not paying for the projects of non-EJ developers. So we didn't want customers who met those EJ requirements to be paying for system upgrades in other locations. Next slide, please. I do want to mention one key detail before I move on from this. This new policy only applies to service transformer upgrades. They're the most common. The costs are generally predictable and relatively lower than other types of upgrades. And for that reason, we didn't want to incentivize potentially costly upgrades, especially where other alternatives to those solutions might exist. For example, if there's system needs that are requiring upgrades, there may be opportunities to apply non-wire solutions or other options. So that covers very briefly the residential interconnection upgrade policy revision that we did in this docket. And again, for more detail, please see the full decision up on the right of that slide. Now we can turn to the non-residential systems. Next slide, please. So I'll start by saying this investigation is currently underway. This is docket 2206-29 RE01. And so we have to keep a couple things in mind. First, there's no new policy change implemented as of yet. And there's more work to be done before a final decision is reached. With that said, I did want to provide an overview or provide an update on the status of this investigation. So the current policy for non-residential DERs, again, DERs that are larger than 25 kV, is similar to the now former policy of the residential DERs. That is, when the interconnection process is undertaken, if a required distribution system upgrade is identified in order to safely and reliably interconnect that system, then the applicant triggering that upgrade is responsible for all costs. So the authority initiated this proceeding sort of in parallel with the prior one to identify areas to improve that policy, and really with a goal to further state policy goals for decarbonization. So the current status in December, the authority issued a straw proposal that proposes a couple policy changes to that policy. So first, the proposal outlines a number of objectives we wanted to identify the objectives that we're looking to in order to meet the state's decarbonization goals. And those objectives are to support the accelerated deployment of non-residential DERs, to establish an equitable sharing of distribution system upgrade costs, and to maintain interconnection costs as a price signals. So to accomplish these objectives, the straw proposal did a number of things. So it recommends shifting away from the current cost allocation policy, where the applicant triggering the upgrade is responsible for all costs, to what we call a beneficiary pays principle. Under this principle, the upgrade costs are shared proportional to that customer's benefits, to how the customer benefits from that upgrade and their contribution to the need for that upgrade. So that's really, you can read the decision where we go into detail explaining that, but it's essentially tying a customer's charge for that upgrade on the size of their system and how that size system contributes to the need of the upgrade, or how it's benefited from another upgrade. And the way you would do this policy, as outlined in the straw proposal, is through what we call a group study process, where the DER interconnection applications are reviewed as a group based on location. And so they're reviewed at the same time rather than individually under the existing policy. And the straw proposal outlines in detail how that would work, considers the trade-offs of such a process, and identifies solutions to any challenges. And separately, the straw proposal, but relatedly, the straw proposal outlines long-term improvements to the interconnection process for these larger systems, with the goal to provide greater certainty around the interconnection costs for these developers. And we do that. We recommend a change through, or a new policy through an application fee, essentially an application fee adder, or an incremental application fee that's based on a number of factors. And the factors are essentially based on forecast system upgrade costs. So a forecast of the interconnection upgrade costs that would be likely due to the number of applications or the size of applications and those sorts of factors. And again, this straw proposal outlines, an idea for how that would work. And again, I'll end here with stating that this investigation is still underway. So right now, we received feedback on February 14th on that straw proposal. So we're in the process of reviewing that feedback, and I'll end here just by saying there's more to come. So please stay tuned. Next slide, please. Shifting gears a little and moving away from DER interconnection cost allocation. So docket 220605 is PURA's implementation of Public Act 2255. So Section 2 of Public Act 2255, an act concerning energy storage systems and electric distribution system reliability. That section of that act requires that the authority directs Eversource and UI to submit up to 3 proposals in which they would build, own, and operate energy storage systems. The purpose of those systems would be to demonstrate and investigate how those energy storage systems could improve resilience of critical infrastructure and improve reliability of the electric distribution system. Back in September, the authority outlined a number of technical requirements and proposal requirements that we would, this is September of 22, that we would be able to evaluate proposals that had been submitted by Eversource and UI. So in December, the authority issued a final decision that approved 3 UI projects. UI proposed a battery storage system in Bridgeport that's an expandable microgrid. So the system provides outage support, resilience benefits to 3 facilities as a core in Bridgeport Elderly Apartments, the Cartwright Towers, and the Cartwright Condominium Association Building. These are 3 9-story elderly housing facilities. The system is also expandable. So when I say expandable, I mean that the system can provide outage support beyond those facilities to neighboring customers as well. And that's based on the resilience need at the time. We also approved a battery storage system in North Haven. The focus of that system would serve critical community facilities at the Montoise Health and Rehabilitation Center, which is a senior living care facility and includes outpatient and rehabilitation services. Like the Bridgeport system, this system is expandable to provide outage support to customers in that area based on the resilience need. The system is also unique in that it's designed to support further DER, generally solar PV, but other DERs. So it's designed to support further DER deployment in that area. And so it provides not just resilience benefits, but also system reliability and supports further DER adoption in that area. The third project will enhance resilience in New Haven, and it provides outage support to the Hill Regional Career High School, which is used by that community as an emergency shelter and provides other community services. This system is also flexible and expandable and can provide outage support to additional customers in that area, again, based on resilience need. And I want to add to all these projects that were developed by UI, they were done so in conjunction with local officials who identified these facilities to be key critical facilities to focus resilience and reliability priorities. And lastly, the authority has yet to authorize projects proposed by Eversource. We do expect proposals to be filed with us by the end of May of this year, so please stay tuned there. And again, before moving on, more detail could be found in the decision, which is linked up in the upper right. Next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to shift gears, but I want to refer back. I want to refer back to, if you recall, Peter's overview of PBR in the goals and priority outcomes that he reviewed there. In the phase 1 PBR decision. So we have the Reliability, Security, and Resilience Unit is responsible in large part for resilience and reliability efforts. And if you go back all the way to our Equitable Modern Grid Framework, that was summarized with a key objective there, which is to enhance customer access to a more resilient, reliable, and secure commodity. Now, the PBR framework outlined further objectives and priority outcomes. Now, those priority outcomes and objectives are what drive all of our decision making for all of our decisions. We use those as a basis to evaluate whether it's a proposal from a utility company or it's a specific investigation that we identify. And the next docket I'll talk about is our decision in AMI. So that is our Equitable Modern Grid Reopener, docket number 171203 REO2. And if we turn to the next slide, please. In this docket, we looked at the statewide deployment of advanced metering infrastructure. So if we call back to Peter's discussion on the priority outcomes, or the agency goals and the priority outcomes, AMI, if you refer back to that slide, you'll see that AMI had two priority outcomes that it wanted that we would support with this investigation. One is distribution system utilization. The other is customer empowerment. And taking a step back even more, if we refer back to the Equitable Modern Grid Framework, we see the Equitable Modern Grid Framework identified AMI as foundational to meeting all of the Equitable Modern Grid goals. And it did that while also recognizing that AMI needed to be deployed strategically and cost effectively. And then we further refine that through the PBR objectives and priority outcomes. So as I mentioned, AMI can support both priority outcomes in our PBR as identified in our PBR phase 1 decision. So distribution system utilization. And really what that means is the functionality provided by AMI can really improve how efficiently the distribution system operates or how efficiently it's being utilized. And second, customer empowerment. How can AMI support customer empowerment? It does so by providing customers with the tools to conserve usage, to take control of their energy usage, manage their energy habits, and that allows them to conserve, which promotes efficiency and conservation goals, but also to save. They have further control of their bill, they can use energy, and the AMI will help support this. So this slide, when we started that investigation, let me start here with this slide, which sort of summarizes both. This slide summarizes both a snapshot of the current AMI deployment levels for both Eversource and UI, and what future AMI deployment level needs are. So for UI, they have over 90% deployment of AMI meters. They received, which started over 15 years ago. They have during that time received active operational benefits from the deployment of those meters. And really the next steps are sort of incremental finalizing of remaining AMI meter deployment, and then identifying ways to take advantage of the current AMI infrastructure that's been deployed. With Eversource, 75% of the customers have standard meters that are not part of an advanced metering infrastructure. So really, the next steps for Eversource included a total deployment of AMI, which includes AMI meters, supporting communications infrastructure, back office systems, an update to any supporting, such as meter data management systems, customer information systems, which allow you to bill and provide other services to customers with that AMI data. So it involves quite a complex deployment process. So the challenge for the authority was to develop a clear framework for how future AMI deployment can help achieve the Equitable Modern Grid Framework goals, our PBR goals and priority outcomes, while ensuring the companies are doing that investment prudently and while reducing the risk to ratepayers. Next slide, please. So the effective deployment of AMI, with this decision, which was issued January 3rd of this year, the authority has sought to form a transparent and pragmatic framework that the EDCs can apply during their future rollout of any AMI infrastructure. So what this decision does is it provides safeguards, which protects ratepayers, and it provides a very clear and transparent framework to encourage the company to engage cooperatively with the authority and proceed with AMI investment. So how did we do that? We took our PBR goals, which I've outlined and reviewed, and we applied them to all the benefits and costs associated with AMI. So if you look in the decision, you can find all the detail again, but the AMI benefits are outlined in great detail in that decision, and so are the costs. All the infrastructure that's required to support AMI and all the benefits, and then we outlined as many benefits as we could identify that would support our PBR goals, whether it's utilizing the distribution system to its utmost, or whether it's providing customers with the tools so that they can engage with their energy usage. And we did that by identifying AMI, what we called AMI scorecards. These identify all the metrics that we could think of to enable us to evaluate, number one, are the companies deploying AMI according to their plan? And number two, are the benefits that have been promised by AMI, are they being realized by the customers? And this process allows us to review the deployment of AMI by the companies and to identify areas for improvement, and create an iterative process an open, transparent, and iterative process where we're working together to deploy AMI, achieve the goals outlined in both Equitable Modern Grid, further developed in the PBR framework, and And I think that concludes my summary of this. And now the next steps, we're expecting to receive AMI plans that outline the benefits of AMI, the costs, include deployment and implementation timelines, include a number of other factors that'll ensure the success of AMI, including the development and approval of time of use rates, plans to engage with customers so they're aware of the AMI opportunities and how they can best engage with AMI. And also, we are establishing, we just established a new docket to consider the development of a cost recovery mechanism as requested by Eversource to enable them to support AMI deployment in Eversource's territory. So that is docket number 171046 REO4. That is currently underway, so please stay tuned there. And I want to thank you very much for your time today. I hope the overview was helpful for all the investigations and achievements that RSR unit has done. I will now turn it over to Carl Baker, who is the supervisor of the Gas Pipeline Safety Unit. Thank you very much. Carl?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Steve. Yeah, as Steve mentioned, Carl Baker, I'm the supervisor of the Gas Pipeline Safety Unit. And we're responsible for two main areas. One, as you can imagine, gas pipeline safety, and the other, the Call Before You Dig program. With respect to pipeline safety, PURA is tasked with ensuring safe and reliable operation of gas facilities. That can be both natural gas companies that people are fairly familiar with, like Connecticut Natural Gas, Southern Connecticut Gas, and Eversource Gas. We also have responsibility for municipal gas that happens to be an operator in Norwich, the Norwich Department of Public Utilities. They're a little unique. We're responsible for only safety jurisdiction with them. We are not responsible for rate jurisdiction, as they have their own board of public utilities that set their own rates. We ensure the safety by going out and doing routine audits of their plans, procedures, and records. Those are usually in-office audits, but we also spend a significant portion of time out in the field evaluating their operations and maintenance activities and their construction of either new facilities or replacement facilities. This can include both their internal employees and also their contractors. We also have an agreement with the United States Department of Transportation, Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA, that allows us to inspect the interstate natural gas operators that come into the state of Connecticut and provide us gas from all over the country. We're unique. There's only a handful of us states that are allowed to do these inspections. These are some lesser known companies like Algonquin Gas, Tennessee Gas, and Iroquois. But it's important that we have that ability, kind of a one-stop shop for us. If you're talking natural gas, you can come to us, and we're responsible to ensure everything from the wellhead all the way to the burner tips pretty much come under us. The other half of our program, the Call Before You Dig program, this is where people who want to excavate in the state of Connecticut, if they're using mechanized equipment, be that something like a backhoe or a trencher, they need to use this program. It allows them to notify the utilities of where they're going to excavate. The utilities then take this information, they go out and they mark the ground. Commonly you see spray paint on the ground, right? And maybe some red lines or yellow lines. Those are the utilities notifying excavators where their facilities are, so that when the excavators do get to work, they can perform that work safely and not damage any of the underground facilities. Next slide, please. In 2023, my team performed 484 pipeline safety inspections. Those are days that we're actually out there for the entire day. Again, that could be in the office, but most of the time that's out in the field watching the actual operations. We also performed 828 Call Before You Dig inspections. That's going out to job sites and seeing that both the excavators are doing their job properly, but that also the utilities had done their piece properly to ensure that the excavator can work safely. As well with Call for Dig, lots of training sessions. We have an individual who's happy to train anybody to make the system safer. We've trained lots of excavators, also utilities and municipalities need help as well. We're always available. Unfortunately, we did end up finding 80 violations during the course of 2023. Those are things that we document those violations, send it to whoever it was. They are responsible to fix their issues and report back to us, and then we go back out to ensure that it's cleaned up. And with that, we also issued 1.4 million in civil penalties. The vast majority of that went to the 3 large gas companies, and certainly some went to the excavation community, but that's also the utilities for sometimes not marking out their facilities correctly. And a good point to note on that, almost all of those fines end up going to Operation Fuel to help lower gas customers' bills. So, unfortunately, we'd rather not be in the business of collecting fines, but if we have to, at least something good is coming out of it. That's all I have to report from Pipeline Safety, and I'd like to pass the presentation on to Jim Boccolina. Thank you.
Okay, everyone can hear me or not. Some reason my video is not showing up.
We can hear and see you, Jim.
Oh, you can't see me. I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. Yes, good morning. Happy to be here today. I am Jim Boccolina, supervisor of the Regulatory Requirements Unit, which plays a large role in the review of rate case requests. So today I'll be discussing the process of the rate case process, as well as outcomes in 2023, as well as current rate case activity. So a core function of PURA is the review of rate increase requests of regulated utilities. PURA rate regulates investor-owned utilities in the electric, natural gas, and water sectors. As Josh went over briefly at the beginning, we do not regulate all utilities, such as municipalities or those formed as taxing districts. PURA's authority and its rate case responsibilities fall within Section 1619 of the Connecticut General Statutes, which discusses the process that PURA undertakes in its review of rate case applications. Within 1619, they mention timeframes for the completion of these reviews and time allotted. Apologize there. Apologize, I believe my video went out for a moment there. Is everyone able to hear me?
We are, yes.
Oh, okay, thank you. So I'll start over here with the timeframes. Timeframes for completion of these reviews are specified within the Connecticut General Statute 1619. The time allotted for reviewing electric and gas rate requests is 350 days, while the period allowed to complete a water rate case is 270 days. And I will note that prior to 2023, the time allowed for these reviews was 180 days. So it's allowed us to do the increased time frame has allowed us to do more and has been extremely beneficial. So very happy for the increase in time to review these rate cases. PURA's review is guided by the ultimate goal of determining if the utility's proposed increase is just, necessary, and reasonable. Some of the things we do, engineers review plan investment, accountants review expense requests, finance specialists examine appropriate return on company investment, and rate specialists determine appropriate rate structures and how ratepayers should be charged for service provided. In addition to the dollars involved, of primary importance is customer service, and the company's rules, regulations, and overall customer service performance is evaluated during the rate case process. So how do we get all the information to evaluate a company's rate request? So the company's application is vetted through inspection of plant, audit of financials, and subsequent questioning of interrogatories asked of the company. Further, we have the hearing process, which allows for PURA staff and other parties to cross-examine company witnesses. It is a comprehensive process and highlights the need for the increased timeframes that we recently discussed. It's important to note that throughout the review process, it is the burden of proof for justifying any and all requests within a rate application falls with the utility. If you could turn to the next slide, please. This slide demonstrates the major activities that take place throughout a rate case. Here are two active rate cases, the Connecticut Water Company and the Connecticut Natural Gas and Southern Connecticut Gas Companies. In actuality, there are many more steps within the schedule that move the rate case to final decision, but these are the main points of emphasis in the schedule. Something else important to note here is that the process allows for many opportunities for public comment. Each of these dockets offer 3 public comment hearings, 2 in person and 1 virtual. The public is also encouraged to file written comments during the course of a rate case. You also note that the schedule includes a significant number of evidentiary hearings, 9 days of hearing for CWC, Connecticut Water, and 18 days of hearing are anticipated for Connecticut Natural Gas, Southern Connecticut Gas rate cases. The main difference between these two is that the CNG SCG docket are actually 2 separate rate cases filed under 1 docket. So that the difference between the times there and the number of evidentiary hearings. And as mentioned, evidentiary hearings are where PURA staff and other parties cross-examine company witnesses to further test the just, necessary, and reasonable nature of investments and expenses claimed by the company in its application. So as you can see here, for Connecticut Water case, we are in the briefing stage of the schedule with the final decision schedule for June 28, 2024. Between now and then, PURA staff will consider all evidence obtained during the discovery and hearing process and formulate recommendations for commissioner consideration. For CNG, SCG, we're nearing the end of the discovery phase and we'll begin hearings April 22nd. You turn to the next. Also with that, there are some details regarding the rate cases there. Connecticut Water seeking a revenue requirement of $140 million. The requested ROE is there as well as the number of customers served. And you can see similar statistics for the SCG and CNG filings. Okay, if you could turn to the next. Thank you. So those 2 cases, Connecticut Water, CNG, SCG, we've started reviewing in the latter part of 2023. What we actually completed in 2023, 2 rate cases concerning the Aquarian Water Company and the United Illuminating Company. This table lists general information for each company and requested and approved ROE and revenue requirements for each company. As you can see, the requested revenue requirement was $236 million for Aquarian Water. The ultimate approved was $196 million, so a $40 million reduction, essentially to what the request was. And similarly for United Illuminating, $460 million. They're looking total revenues of that was decreased to $385 million. And you can also see the requested ROEs for Aquarian and United Illuminating, and those approved for those 2 cases. Also important to note that these 2 dockets were reviewed in the same manner previously discussed and utilized the 270-day and for Aquarian and 350-day schedule for UI. And also we have links to those decisions, which comprehensive decisions. I believe one is approximately 270 pages, the other one is 300 pages, and the links to those are above the table. With that, I will turn it back to Josh.
Great. Thanks so much, Jim, and thank you to Peter, Stephanie, Steve, and Carl for those presentations. Before I pass it over to EOE leadership, I just wanted to note for folks that are on the line that we're likely going to go past the 1:30 time that we had noticed. If you have to drop off, we'll of course post the recording of this webinar on our YouTube page, and the slides will be made available on our website. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to the leadership of EOE Director Tom Lopez, as well as Nicole Brandt.
Hi, good morning. Thanks, Josh, for that introduction. So I am Tom Lopez. I'm the Director of the Office of Education, Outreach, and Enforcement, known as EOE for short. We were established in 2020, July 2020. So we've existed as an office for almost 4 years now. Ultimately, our key objective is to provide ratepayers and non-traditional stakeholders that interact with PURA an improved customer service experience. Ultimately, because of PURA's quasi-judicial structure, right, it operates effectively like a court, right, with commissioners in sort of a judge type function. There are limitations on communications that PURA staff, and Josh alluded to this earlier in his presentation, specifically decisional staff, that there's limitations on those communications that they can have with stakeholders and members of the public, particularly during active docketed proceedings. So these rules are called ex parte rules, and there are prohibitions on ex parte communications, and essentially that's to prevent any individual participant in a docketed proceeding from gaining some type of unfair advantage in terms of either additional knowledge or over other participants in that docket. So ultimately, we, as in our office, EOE, we, however, can speak to members of the public and other stakeholders to help those stakeholders during docketed proceedings, right? Ultimately, we provide a resource to many customers or stakeholders in proceedings. It's ultimately, our office cannot, though, provide and speak on behalf of the authority or predictions about what the authority will do in any given docket. We also can't provide informal legal opinions about what the authority may be doing. I also want to say that we serve other statutory roles required of PURA, particularly in rate cases. In rate cases, there is a requirement for a section of the authority to be partitioned off from decisional staff and serve as a separate party, and we do provide that in rate cases. Next slide, please. So just would like to take a minute or a few minutes to discuss EOE's organizational structure. So we're comprised of 3 separate units. We have the licensing and certification unit, and ultimately that unit is responsible for analyzing and processing licensing and certification matters that come in to PURA. That includes electric and water submetering applications. That includes electric supplier and aggregator applications, as well as natural gas seller applications. Those are undocketed matters, and class 1, 2, and 3 renewable certifications. We also support the Energize CT rate board. Ultimately, that is the location where customers can go and shop for third-party electric suppliers and our staff essentially manage that function on the rate board and the back end of the system called Rate Manager. We are looking for compliance on a daily basis to ensure that third-party electric suppliers' offers on the rate board match what their offers are on their own web pages, and ensuring that if there's not a match, that we pull the permissions away from those third-party suppliers to make sure that they get in compliance and their offers match. We also have the mediation and enforcement unit. So we mediate disputes related to the regulated companies, and we're enforcing applicable statutes and regulations. We're always investigating compliance issues for both regulated companies and other licensed entities. And we're going to facilitate settlement agreements and help bring about customer restitution from third-party electric suppliers if there are any violations. And then last, but certainly not least, and probably the most public facing, we're comprised of the Education and Outreach Unit, also known as Consumer Affairs. So we receive complaints and inquiries from our ratepayers, and we work to provide resolution and resources to assist those customers. We produce and distribute educational materials. We go out and provide PURA 101 presentations to the public when requested, and we also manage the utility scorecard report. So next slide, please. So I will talk about these EOE 2023 stats, and I'll during the slide, I'll bring in my deputy, Nicole Grant, to speak about a few things as well. So we reviewed over 18,000 license and applications in 2023. That's quite a large amount of reviews that we are doing for these licensing matters, right? And the great bulk of that number are class 1, 2, and 3 facilities. And I do also want to talk about supplier settlements. We had 2 dockets that resulted in $2 million in settlement agreement. So I think, we had a very good year, ensuring that was Zoom Energy and Town Square Energy. So that was a great outcome for customers in Connecticut, and making sure we're holding third-party electric suppliers accountable to the law. At this point, I would like Nicole Grant to step in and talk about our complaints and inquiries.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everybody. I'm Nicole Grant. I'm Tom's deputy in EOE. I'll just say a couple of things quickly. So as Tom mentioned, the Education Outreach has a subset of really great folks who work in essentially consumer affairs. And it's probably one of the most public-facing kinds of work that we do. And sort of for the last almost 30 years, PURA, in one form or another, has maintained relationships with customers and has taken these kinds of inquiries and complaints from the public with the sole objective of helping customers, both in areas that we directly regulate and in some areas as a courtesy or as a group of knowledgeable folks to help traffic those complaints to other parties, or to provide and get information for customers as best as we can. So we do a lot of things in that regard. So first of all, last year alone, so January to December, we responded to 17,000 complaints and inquiries. These aren't all necessarily full and formal investigations, but those are people who contacted us on discrete topics. And if you compare to the report from 2022, you'll see that that's a significant increase in almost a third increase in the amount of inquiries and ticks that we took. So with the same amount of people, we're doing quite a bit more work. And I think it's a reflection of a couple of things. One, it's a complicated industry. Two, it's been a time of disruptions of energy, change in the markets and globally and locally, and also just the sheer amount of work that PURA is doing. We don't just get complaints, we also get a lot of questions about some of the work that PURA is doing, and we try really hard to answer those things. Some of the things that we take complaints on, interestingly, it's across the board, and you can see this in the full report. You can see that we take inquiries and complaints on a lot of industries, and some of the most popular ones, probably doesn't surprise you, are electric, so EDCs, and and on gas, right, because this touches a lot of households. But we also get a lot of general information complaints. That could be anything from I have a question trying to understand what this program is, or I have I'm a student who would like to know more about some interesting topic. Really range. Also, another really large area is actually CATV, so cable and cable television and internet. Now, these are not things we directly fully regulate, but we certainly do get a lot of complaints and inquiries and questions, and we try to help customers by directing them or just informing them and educating them. So not only, as our title says, not only are we doing things like resolving customer complaints, but we're truly trying to educate the public. And so that sometimes means stepping out of our comfort zones where we have complete control and authority or something like that, and trying really hard to connect customers just to resources in general. Part of what we did is also we work to understand where customers may be due some kind of restitution, whether it's overcharging for a third-party supplier, some kind of accidental billing error. Lots of things can happen over time, and we work very closely with the utilities to ensure that customers, that we help them pay the right amounts for the services that they have used. And we returned over $164,000 to customers last year through our direct efforts. And the report further elucidates the kinds of things that we work on. I think it's pretty interesting, that probably not surprising that I mentioned that we get lots of questions on bills and payment arrangements and quality of service, general customer service issues across all the utilities. And we really welcome the public to reach out to us. The best way, to do that is we have many, many forms to do that. So email and phone, all on our website and in the report. And we do answer all of the inquiries that are sent to us. And we appreciate everybody who works with us and who helps us across PURA and throughout the public and all of our other partners and stakeholders. So back to you, Tom.
Thanks, Nicole. I really do appreciate that. And I did want to add that related to restitution, so that's 164,000 returned to customers from the direct actions of our consumer affairs unit. And while it's not included here in the supplier settlements, the settlement agreement with Zoom also led to an additional approximately $125,000 in restitution to customers on top of the $1.5 million settlement. So an additional $125,000 in restitution was delivered to customers as a result of that settlement agreement. Additionally, we in EOE represent PURA on over 11 state mandated working groups. I don't want to talk about all of them here, but I will mention that our involvement is, some of the focus is really the vegetation management working group. We're involved in essentially the solar interconnection working group, right? Distributed generation working group. We're also actively involved in the utility pole attachments and transfers working group. We're involved in the Low Income Energy Advisory Board, otherwise known as LIBE. And we also have representation on the Connecticut Water Planning Council. So there's a tremendous amount of work being done by our staff in these working groups. So next slide, please. Here's a highlight of just some of the key dockets that EOE was involved in 2023. You can see these dockets right here, right? Two of them I've already mentioned related to settlement agreements with Zoom and where we have Town Square that resulted in $2 million of settlement agreement. We also were involved in, and not listed here, was 130309, which was mega, and we were involved in preparing a notice of violation for the authority to post. Ultimately, the violations of law for Mega Energy resulted in their license, third-party electric supplier license being revoked. So that was another significant action. And I wanted to mention, and Nicole hinted about that, right? We are involved not just in the rate cases, but we've been involved in the energy affordability dockets as a separate party, and are very involved in the low income discount rate. And so there's we have significant amount of interaction with the public on those topics as those things are getting implemented and changing. And so, you know, I think we're doing some really important work for the ratepayers of Connecticut. And with that, I will turn it back over to Josh. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Tom and Nicole. Really appreciate that update. And last but not least, we'll turn it over to Taryn O'Connor, who leads our Office of Legislative and Government Affairs.
Good morning. Thank you, Josh. Morning, almost afternoon. My name is Taryn O'Connor. I'm the Director of Legislation, Regulations, and Communications for PURA. And I'm coming at you today with my Director of Legislation hat on. So we are, of course, in the throes of the 2024 session right now, which I'm sure we will have plenty to report on and talk about next year at this time. But for today, I'm going to look back briefly on last year's session and touch on just a few pieces of legislation that came out of the 2023 legislative session in progress. I will first share that last year kept PURA staff quite busy throughout the session. We offered testimony on around 20 bills. We walked away from session with some pretty important homework assignments from the General Assembly, and as well as other key pieces of legislation that might not intimately involve us, but like we will certainly keep our eye on and follow as they are implemented. You heard throughout this morning's presentation several mentions of some of the legislative reporting that we have. We are responsible for a number of regular legislative reports, so that's kind of happening throughout the year. But for today, I just have this one slide. I'm not going to read through it, but I'm going to touch on these three pieces of legislation. The first being Public Act 23-199. This was House Bill 5641, and it addresses utility service terminations at commercial or non-residential properties. In response to the passage of this legislation, we opened a proceeding, 230702, and we issued a decision that pretty much lays out specific processes and procedures around the transfer of gas and electric service from a commercial tenant to the landlord, the property owner. Think about things like avoiding frozen pipes in the winter. The decision also prescribes a specific form to be used to carry out such actions. So an important piece of legislation and an important next step for this issue. The second piece of legislation I would like to highlight is Public Act 23-102. I'm sure many of you recall Senate Bill 7 from last year. This, of course, was our big energy bill in Connecticut. And at 40 sections strong, we could certainly sit here for another couple hours and just talk about that piece of legislation, which we of course will not do today. I'm only going to highlight section 15 from that bill, which tasked PURA with creating a stakeholder compensation program. So this allows qualified stakeholder groups to come to PURA, participate in our proceedings, and ultimately be compensated for certain expenses that are related to participating. So those expenses will be paid for by the company that is the subject of the proceeding. This legislation passed, and in response, we opened a docket, we worked through the specifics, and we issued a final decision in January. That decision lays out eligibility requirements, application process, who can participate in this program, how can they participate. We highlight and identify funding limits related to the program. Any one stakeholder group that comes and participates in a PURA proceeding can be compensated no more than $100,000. Similarly, any number of stakeholder groups that come, and participates in a proceeding cannot be compensated collectively more than $300,000. And the last funding limit in place is around the calendar year, and that's set at 1.2 million. So as a reminder too, PURA operates like a court. We can only ever base our decisions on what's before us in the record. With the addition of this program, we can perhaps start hearing from new and or just a broader variety of voices in the hearing room, which can only enhance our record in any case. So again, an exciting and important piece of a very big bill that came from last year. The third piece of legislation I'm just going to quickly touch on is Public Act 23-156. This was House Bill 6851, and it addresses the implementation of a hydrogen strategic plan. This plan is expected to be issued by DEEP actually at the end of 2024, at the end of the year. This is a good example of a piece of legislation that, even though it doesn't task PURA to be at the helm of seeing out the legislative assignment, we very much care about what's happening here and are staying close to it and involved, and will stand ready to help implement any of those recommendations or regulations that come out of that plan. So this is my one slide. This is very tip of the iceberg. We can certainly talk for a long time about legislation and legislative assignments. I am always happy to dig in. Don't ever hesitate to reach out if there's something specific on the legislative front that you'd like to discuss or get more information about. And with that, I will say thank you and pass it back to you, Josh.
Thank you so much, Karen, for that, and thank you to all my colleagues, not only for presenting today, but for their hard work and pulling together this presentation and report and all the great work that was done last year. I also want to thank, I mentioned Julia Domain, who's helped with this report and this slideshow, but I also want to thank Joe Cooper, who is our Deputy Communications Director. I also want to thank everyone for joining us today. I mentioned at the top that public participation in our processes is vital to making sure that PURA is able to issue robust decisions that consider a variety of perspectives and ultimately gets to the best outcome for all of the interested parties that are before us and ultimately the ratepayer. So thank you for your participation, not only today, but for your participation in our proceedings over the last year and previously. We hope to see you again this year, whether it's in a in-person hearing or whether it's a virtual hearing room. You are always welcome, and thank you again for your time and attention today.